Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišák, and I work as the deputy head of the foreign desk at the Slovak daily Pravda, which by the name means truth, and is not the Russian Pravda. A new Hungarian government, led by Prime Minister Péter Magyar, will take office on May 9. What will be its primary focus during the first 100 days? Unfreezing EU funds and de-urbanization? And what lies ahead for Viktor Orbán and his Fidesz after the crushing defeat delivered by Magyar's Tisza party in the elections held on April 12th? In this episode of the Global Agora, I speak with Zsuzsanna Weg, an analyst and program officer with the German Marshall Fund's European Resilience Program in Berlin. Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Coffee. You can find the link in the description of this episode. And now, on to the new debate. Zsuzsanna, what can we say about the current status of Fidesz structures and those close to the party? There have been reports of Viktor Orbán's oligarchs attempting to move their capital out of Hungary.
Yes, there is a general sense of, I think, confusion and panic. Fidesz circles not really knowing what to expect, but they definitely don't expect anything good for themselves. I think the extent of Tisza's victory was quite unexpected in these circles, and we have seen that right after the election, it appeared like that there is sort of a communication freeze. Leading politicians have not spoken for days. Then when eventually they spoke, then it was still very vague that, of course, they continue to represent what they refer to as the national side, so continuing with this very exclusionary, divisive rhetoric. The party decided on a complete restructuring of its parliamentary faction. Leading politicians, including Viktor Orbán, are not taking up their mandate, so it's going to be a very small faction now compared to the previous size. Fidesz is down to 44 MPs, 52 together with the Christian Democratic People's Party, down from having two-thirds majority. And then we also see the implications of the change in business circles, in the propaganda of Fidesz. We have heard that, for example, Megaphone, which was this channel for Fidesz's propaganda funded by billions of forints, has now funding for one more month of staff salary. There are layoffs. There have been layoffs in the Digital Democracy Development Agency, which was responsible for Fidesz's digital circles. Also, just yesterday, Századvég, Fidesz's think tank, announced layoffs and is now repositioning itself as an independent institution. MCC, the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, publicly communicated that it is open to collaborate with the new government, claiming that what it has done and what it has received funding for over the past years was activities of public service. To me, MCC has appeared more like a tool of Fidesz's influence building, but now they are also positioning themselves. And then there is the business. We hear about oligarchs trying to take out their assets because they expect prosecution for corruption. Just yesterday, Gyula Balási, who was in charge of an immense communication media empire, announced that he is willing to just hand it all over to the state because the functions of this business venture have been rather serving the public interest. So there's a lot of turmoil. They are expecting massive changes, and they are expecting that the financial viability of these institutions is not going to be sustainable.
You already mentioned Matthias Corvinus Collegium. Are we already seeing cases, perhaps especially at the local level, of Fidesz members trying to communicate or even trying to say we will collaborate with the upcoming new government?
I haven't seen really high-profile ones, but there have been rather defections, if you will, from the party right after the election. people who were running in individual districts and have been members of Fidesz, even holding governmental position, like Orsolya Ferenc, who was government commissioner for space, found in herself to criticize Fidesz and the government and its campaign, the corruption, the luxurious enrichments of certain Fidesz-related business people. So there is open criticism also coming from Fidesz ranks. Both her and Nóra Király, who was running in another district in Budapest, didn't make it into the parliament and were not considered for the mandates distributed via the national list when it was reshuffled. So this sort of approach was definitely not welcome by Fidesz. But I think as the government takes shape, we will see more of such defections, maybe people trying to switch sides. I think there will be very little appetite for that, though, by the new government, because the popular mandate is very clear on people wanting regime change.
So what's next for Viktor Orbán? Before the election, somebody told me that he might not prefer this option, but at one moment the only option for him might be Moscow. And of course we are probably not there, but what's next for him from your perspective?
Yeah, we are not there, and I think what he is currently considering rather is the United States. But this is a massive blow to him. This is also a personal defeat, and he needs to come to terms with that, reposition himself. There will be a party congress on the 13th of June that will elect the new leadership of Fidesz. So Orbán's position is also up for election or re-election. And up until now, these were really largely symbolic. His leadership was generally confirmed, not really contested. We don't really know of the internal factions in Fidesz. This is a very hierarchical and centralized party. So if I think about his political future and the potential for him to step back, which I would not exclude at this point, the other question that also comes to my mind is what's going to happen with Fidesz? Will the party manage to remain coherent and hold together? Who is somebody who can step into Orbán's shoes and arrange really that sort of renewal and drive that renewal that the party would need under the current circumstances? It would be none of the politicians who didn't take on their mandate now. So obviously Antal Rogán is out. He was not very popular in the party. Balázs Orbán is going to take on a mandate in the European Parliament from July. I don't think that this is a position for which he would be particularly well suited. So who remains? János Lázár maybe, Gergely Gulyás, but could they really command the party? I'm not sure. So apart from Orbán's future, I think this is also a milestone for Fidesz's future and whether it will be able to renew. It doesn't have a base in the youngest generation, so it's going to face a very difficult time going forward. This was a massive defeat. So I would not exclude that even Orbán doesn't quite know yet what's next for him. Probably not Moscow. If anyone, then probably Péter is more of the candidate for relocating to Russia.
Yeah, I would say so. So talking about Russia, to what extent will Russian and Chinese influence persist in Hungary even after the change in government?
It will. I think the question is which dimensions of the influence we will be talking about. I do expect that the political influence and especially that sort of intelligence and interference that the Orbán government has built with the Russian Federation will cease. This became such a highly politicized topic in the last month of the election campaign that I think there will be a lot of attention to it. And Anita Orbán will also have the hard but crucial task to rid the foreign ministry from Russian infiltration. And this will be crucial to reestablish trust in Hungary among Hungary's allies. But in the energy field, I think decoupling will take a longer time. There is intention for that, which we haven't really seen during the Orbán governments. In fact, Orbán increased Hungary's dependence on Russia. So I think this is now an opening to decrease that and diversify. And in the person of Annika Orbán and the incoming energy minister, Kapitány, it's going to be a topic that will be at the focus of the new government, but it will be a process. When it comes to China, there are, again, two tracks here. One is the business influence and cooperation between Hungary and China. And I do expect that many of the investments will continue to go ahead, but probably under stronger scrutiny. But there have also been attempts to build political cooperation and also like interior security cooperation with China. There has been not so long ago a memorandum of understanding signed between the interior ministries of Hungary and China. And I think that type of cooperation will come under review. So the overall openness from Péter Magyar to do business with China is there. He expressed that. But also the program of the party highlighted that they want to conduct such collaborations within the framework of international law and rules and regulations without undermining Hungary's alliance. So I think the tone will be very different. It's not going to be that accommodating to just whatever China and Russia wants.
What will be Péter Magyar's primary focus during, let's say, the first 100 days of his government? Are freezing of the EU funds and the urbanization?
Unfreezing the EU funds. And a lot of what a new government can do is dependent on that when it comes to setting the country up again for economic development. Unfreezing the EU funds, of course, means reforms into key areas, anti-corruption and judicial independence. So these will be on the top of the list. Péter Magyar promised that Hungary would join the European Public Prosecutor's Office. He also said that he wants to set up a new anti-corruption agency that would focus on retrieving state assets and stolen funds over the past decade and a half. So these will be, I think, the top priorities. At the same time, while there is willingness for reform, I think it's very important that the European Commission doesn't take it as a done deal and continues to scrutinize the process and focuses also on implementation of reforms, not just whatever is passed and adopted. There will also be a key focus on media and reforming the public media, which became a propaganda tool of the Orbán government. Péter Magyar made it very clear. It was very interesting to see that after the election, the state media invited him for interviews, whereas during the campaign, he had no opportunity for that. That didn't go particularly well for the public media channels in that situation. And Péter Magyar made it clear that in the current setup, this is not going to continue. So that's going to be a third big pillar. And I think a fourth one that will holistically unfold is introducing a different communication culture about the work of the government in Hungary. And at least it should. And I think the intentions are there. And this is going to be something that will have to come from the Prime Minister's office, from the Minister for the Prime Minister's office, Bálint Ruf, who has been one of the most respected political analysts in Hungary, a very interesting choice for cabinet. He will be responsible for unrolling a different political and communication culture around the work of the government in the future.
And what about this, what I call the urbanization? I mean, how tough will really Magyar's government be on Fidesz? And of course, it must be a divide between the executive power and police and judicial and prosecutors. But as you mentioned, they want to set up a new anti-corruption office and also to retrieve some funds that were stolen and so on. So how tough will Magyar's government be on Fidesz?
When it comes to the urbanization in the state institutions, that is also going to be a short-term priority. This will concern the removal or co-optation, if possible, of veto players whom Fidesz has installed in a series of state institutions. The president, the head of the public prosecutor's office, state audit office, the constitutional court, who are all put in their position by the governing party based on personal loyalties to the regime. With the two-thirds majority, FISA can unroll constitutional changes that can address this, but just by calling on them to resign, that doesn't automatically translate into these people leaving office. So I do expect that this is going to be a political struggle, but this will be key for FISA to be able to then implement its program. Beyond the state institutions, if we are thinking about the urbanization also when it comes to going after corrupt politicians and business people, I think that is going to be crucial. The new anti-corruption agency will have that as a task to investigate potential cases of corruption. But yes, this has to be separate from the executive. Once it's set up, it has to do its own thing without interference from the executive.
Looking at the cabinet lineup, what is your assessment? I know they're not even working now, but maybe we can say a few words. Are there any notable surprises?
There are, but generally, which may not really be a surprise because we didn't quite know what to expect to begin with. But what signals a very big shift is the organizational structure of the government. So Fidesz tended to centralize, and it pulled together portfolios under so-called super ministries, sometimes portfolios that didn't have much to do with each other, like having education and health under the Interior Ministry, having sports under the Defense Ministry. So what we see now is that instead of that massive centralization, the governmental structure will be more spread out. We will have many more sectoral ministries with people leading them who have professional experience in the given field. So, for example, the health ministry is going to be headed by a doctor. The education ministry is going to be headed by an expert in the field of education. And this is a big shift because this suggests that ISA moves towards a more technocratic expert governance that wants to factor in the concerns of the given sector and wants to give sectoral responses rather than implementing one unified top-down vision through party cadres. So this, in the logic, it's a big shift. And this also, to me, suggests that it's not only going to be an institutional change, eventually probably also constitutional, but the approach to policy and policy making is going to be very different. When it comes to the personnel choices, maybe just two things that I would highlight that stood out to me as a positive and a negative example. As a positive, I already mentioned Balin Troup's nomination as the minister for the Prime Minister's office who needs to oversee the entire operation of the government. And this is an interesting choice because he is definitely not the person who is right-wing, who would be ideologically aligned with Péter Magyar, but he is an excellent expert who did a lot for making sense of the Orbán regime over the past years and explaining and analyzing. And he has also been working as an advisor, political advisor before. So ideologically, it's not a fitting choice, but it signals also that Péter Magyar wants to move beyond ideology. And the other that I find problematic is the choice for the justice minister, who happens to be Péter Magyar's brother-in-law. And this is a very contentious choice, putting aside Melite Barna's professional credentials, which I do not doubt at all. This personal connection under the current circumstances when people actually wanted to move away from that sort of nepotistic practice that's also characterized Fidesz, is an exposure that I think was really unnecessary. Of course, the Ministry of Justice is going to be under massive scrutiny, especially because that is one of the areas where we will need to see reforms, independence of the judiciary, prosecution, and so on. So the Ministry of Justice, which is working with these fields, of course, is executive and separate from the judicial branch, will face a lot of attention. But still, I do find this choice very sensitive and potentially harmful in the future.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that Magyar went this way, because I think this is, for everybody who is just looking at this, it must create some questions.
Yeah.
But let's talk a bit about Balint Roof. And of course, he is a very interesting choice. On the other hand, as you said, he's not totally ideologically aligned with Péter Magyar. How much he is connected with TISA? His role will be to somehow manage the government, but without having any political power, I would say.
Well, he's not unique in that. Many of the people in the government are coming from outside of the party. Although Anita Orbán has already been announced before the election itself as the foreign minister designate, and now so she also is going to have the position of vice prime minister, deputy prime minister. She was not an active member of TISA before from the start. Judith Lennart, who is going to be responsible for the education portfolio, is also not a member of TISA. Or David Vitezi, who is going to be heading the transportation portfolio, is definitely not a member of TISA. There are several people, experts in their own fields, who are brought in. And I do think that on the one hand, it reflects the shift in the logic. On the other hand, TISA is still a very young party. It's not heading into governance with the type of experience and party structures that, for example, Fidesz had already in 2010. So it doesn't have that stable internal socialization and cadre structure that it can just transfer to leading ministries. So it's going to be a difficult process for all, I think. Many of the people who are entering now the parliament with TISA have absolutely no political experience. So we will see a new parliament that is learning by doing. In a way, this is really resembling that sort of like regime change atmosphere that we must have had in Hungary back in the day when the country transitioned from communism to democracy, that you had a bunch of new faces with no experience who had to learn on the job. And that we will see now again.
How much will Prime Minister Magyar push for the idea of regional cooperation? Politico described his effort with the headline, "Magyar wants to put the Austro-Hungarian Empire back on the map."
I think he doesn't want to go that far. His vision of regional cooperation is more kind of rooted in the late 2000s and stuck somewhere between 2010 and 14, when the V4 was very often seen as a regional engine. And he seems to refer back to the Visegrad cooperation as a positive framework that is also useful for Hungarian interests, potentially expanding it to include Croatia, Slovenia. So that's where the Austro-Hungarian thing comes from. I don't think it's about that. It's about using Central European cooperation as a platform to advocate for the region's interest in the European Union. We will see how this will really go for him, because, as we know, things have shifted quite a bit since that period. The V4 is very different and has been seriously politicized. Because of political divisions, it hollowed out. Now, it seems there may be an interest in reviving it by the other V4 prime ministers. Just, I think it was yesterday that Robert Fico posted a picture with Donald Tusk and Andrej Babiš, three musketeers waiting for the fourth. We will see when Péter Magyar faces the ideological differences as well in this group. I do think it was an attempt also from Fico to divert attention away from the contentious issues of minority rights and the Beneš decrees that Péter Magyar is surely putting on the table when he comes into power vis-a-vis Slovakia. So trying to find some positive agenda items towards him. But I think Péter Magyar will also need to face the reality that the V4 he has in mind is no longer there.
So finally, and I was there in Yerevan when this photo was created. And yes, Prime Minister Fico told the media that yes, three musketeers waiting for the fort. But of course, he also mentioned differences between Bratislava and Budapest. And, Fico and Orbán were close to being best friends forever. And we know there is a debate, and you mentioned there's a debate about the Beneš decrees, and some Slovak politicians complain that Péter Magyar regularly uses the word felvidek when describing Slovakia, and the fact is that this word has a negative connotation among Slovaks. So maybe finally, very briefly, what do you expect? What are your expectations for Slovak-Hungarian relations moving forward?
To me, it appears that minority issues will be on the top of the agenda for Péter Magyar in the initial months of his governance, and not only with Slovakia, but also with Ukraine. In this sense, I think he's also trying to differentiate himself from Orbán, whom he argues just posed as defender of Hungarian interests, but who let certain issues slip. So I do expect that this will be high on the agenda and this will be conflictual. Generally, when it comes to regional partnerships, I do expect that there will be more of an attempt to return to classic diplomacy. And in that regard, Anita Orbán's role is going to be crucial. And I think it's very important in this case that she's not only the foreign minister, but is also the deputy prime minister. So whereas Péter Magyar is way more vocal on highlighting the minority conflicts and issues and demanding resolution, Anita Orbán, when she spoke about this in her interviews, she hit a more constructive tone also towards Ukraine, citing in that case the Polish and the Romanian examples that also face some restrictions of rights of minorities, but could find constructive solutions. So the two together would balance each other out. But the type of ideological closeness and best friends forever attitude, I think, is gone not only toward Fico, but others in the region. Vucic, it's going to be a big shift.
And I know this is not the most important thing, but would you advise to Prime Minister Magyar not to use that often, the word felvidek towards Slovakia?
I generally would advise him to be more diplomatic, not just in this case, but my impression is that already in the past 2 years since he entered the political scene, he has learned a lot. And if he has good people around him who can curtail some of these impulses, that will be beneficial. And I think that he seems to be, so far at least, a politician who is responsive to some form of feedback.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe and listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. The link is in the episode description. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.